There is a hotel in Jerusalem called the Dan Panorama. I usually stay there when I visit Jerusalem. In mid-March, when the coronavirus emerged around the globe and Israel went into a severe lockdown, the hotel was used for COVID-19 positive patients who didn't need hospitalization but still needed to be isolated from their families to prevent further transmission of the virus. The hotel was given a new name by its 180 residents who came from all walks of life: Israeli Jews, Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel, Palestinian residents of Jerusalem, religious and secular. They were all forced to live together until they were no longer infectious. They called the hotel Hotel Corona. You see, something unimaginable happened at Hotel Corona. Something no one expected, not the Israeli army that was enforcing the quarantine, not the politicians and religious leaders who objected to such groups being in forced confinement together, not the skeletal hotel staff that saw all the ways that this could go horribly wrong, and certainly not the residents who were far from family, in an unfamiliar place, and facing a deadly disease. In the midst of a pandemic, they built a social paradise. Zumba classes in the lobby, yoga on the roof, multicultural sing-alongs around the piano. During Passover, the residents actually removed the walls separating the Orthodox and secular Seder meals so that they could eat together as one group, and they invited Muslims and Christians to join in the meal as well. In the most contested piece of land, amongst arguably the most divided people, the Hotel Corona became a model of how we can not only live together, but thrive together. Noam Schuster-Elisassi was a resident of the Hotel Corona.
The power dynamics and the sensitivities that exist outside, I was shocked that they didn't apply to the hotel. We had ultra-Orthodox people and secular people. We had Palestinians and Israelis. Different fragments of society that suddenly we all have a thing in common, we all got sick and we're all stuck in this hotel. It almost seemed like we were in a little bit of like a bubble, a utopia.
How does a horrible crisis equip us to create a better society? That's the subject of tonight's sermon. Faced with a litany of seemingly biblical plagues, COVID-19, climate change, economic crisis, rampant inequality, racism, terrorism, extremism, political strife, some might think that the end is nigh. Many no longer believe that a better world, as opposed to a better life, is possible. And the quest for private well-being seems to supersede the public good. If you watch the news, follow social media, if you listen to the destructive and demeaning political rhetoric that attempts to pass for reasoned debate today, you would not be wrong to conclude that people are self-serving and self-interested, that our base instinct is to take advantage of each other, that were it not for that thin veneer of civil society, we would tear each other to pieces. Writer Rebecca Solnit has spent time studying disasters and the human response to what appears to be the end of the world.
When you see those stupid disaster movies, those movies that tell us that we're sheep, that we're selfish, that we're fearful, you see people panicking, stampeding like sheep, running for the exit, trampling each other. That is not what happens. Actually, we converge on a disaster. Part of why they had blocked off everything below 14th Street in New York after 9/11 is that so many people wanted to help that you would have had massive traffic jams everywhere.
The same was, of course, true here in Canada during 9/11. In Gander, where they opened their homes to those stuck on airplanes, and elsewhere. People rushed to help each other. Rather than fall apart, people pulled together. You see, crises are extraordinarily generative, and through crisis, our better selves often emerge. Crisis and disaster, a pandemic, they have a leveling effect. It's like what happened in the Hotel Corona. The worst of times can bring out the best in people. It can make a paradise out of hell. The word emergency comes from emerge, to rise out of. An emergency is a separation from the familiar, a sudden emergence into an atmosphere, a new atmosphere, one that often demands we rise to the occasion. Our response to a disaster or emergency gives us a glimpse of who else we could be and what else our society could become if we were unconstrained by the pressure to keep doing things as we always do them, and if necessity demanded, as it does now, that we work together to survive. When we strip those constraints away, when a pandemic like this one demands that we stay home for weeks at a time, that we wear masks to protect others from the virus, that we revalue the true essential workers in our society, who are teachers, healthcare providers, food chain workers. When old assumptions and behaviors must be abandoned because they have proven to be deadly, it's then that we can rewrite the way society operates. And I think that we can take as our new model the way human beings respond in a crisis, including this one. Many of us have felt this sometimes viscerally as we have clung to Provincial Health Officer Bonnie Henry's now iconic instructions to us: to be kind, to be calm, to be safe. From this place of simple caring, we strive to live as well as we can under terrible circumstances.
Most people, in fact, in disasters are altruistic, generous, brave, improvisational, deeply communitarian. And not only do they behave really well, but they sometimes find in disaster, even though it's terrible, even though there's been loss of life and everything's been disrupted, they find a sense of community and purpose and agency that's so profound that they also find a great joy in disaster. And that upends not only everything we think about what happens in disasters, but most of what we think about human nature, about who we really are and what's possible for us collectively as a society.
That's what I've seen in this community and in this congregation these past 6 months. Hundreds of our members have donated time and resources to help those hard hit by the multi-layered impacts of this crisis. Led by our Tikkun Olam Go-Go's group, members of the Jewish community have made thousands of masks. Temple Sholom members have volunteered to call every family in the congregation, to reach out and to check in. And those calls, they led to new relationships and to a breaking down of the rampant social isolation that existed long before this virus demanded that we socially distance. Neighborhoods bonded together to create scavenger hunts and sidewalk chalk mazes for kids stuck at home and limited to only being able to walk around the block. Some neighbors combined their bubbles to help with childcare and homeschooling. And if there is one picture that I will always cherish from this still unfolding crisis, it's this one, of Temple Shalom member Chris Friedrichs having a Seder on his sidewalk with all of his neighbors. You see, though the pandemic kept us inside our homes, we opened up our doors, we opened our minds, and we opened our hearts. And we found creative ways to stay connected to each other. Individuals in this community delivered meals, picked up groceries, mowed lawns, led exercise classes and discussion groups online. Children made hundreds of cards and pictures for isolated seniors that they would never meet. And teens helped somebody else's bubby learn how to use FaceTime or Zoom. Things that we never had time for, or maybe even the inclination for, before the great pause, became everyday occurrences. And now they've become the new normal. As an example, I have a Zoom call with my extended family almost every Sunday. I'm home for dinner most nights. I'm baking bread. I've never baked bread before, and I'm driving my car only once or twice a week. The world is sick, but in some ways, each of us and our planet is getting healthier. We're paying more attention to the areas that need more attention, like mental health, living wages, and good government. Over these past 6 months, I have so often seen humanity. I have so often seen you, so many of you, at your best and your kindest. We have shown that when the world seems to be falling apart, human beings hold each other up, hold each other together, and build community. Tomorrow afternoon, we are going to read Torah. We're going to read from the book of Leviticus, chapter 19. We read it every year. It's the Holiness Code. And in there is a verse, Kedoshim tihiyu, Ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. You shall be holy, because I, the eternal your God, am holy. That verse, that obligation, is followed by 36 other verses that explain in concrete terms what it means to be holy. Holiness in our workplace means to use honest weights and measures. Holiness in social relationships is not putting a stumbling block before the blind or cursing the deaf. Honoring one's parents is an act of holiness. Providing for the widow, the orphan, the stranger, loving your neighbor as yourself, they are all acts of holiness. Now, the verses do not explicitly state what holiness in a pandemic looks like, but I think we have a pretty good idea. Holiness in a pandemic looks like each of you, striving to not give in to despair, working to keep yourself and everyone you know and everyone you come in contact with healthy and safe. Holiness in a pandemic is realizing what has always been true, that we're in this together, that we are all connected, that what affects one of us impacts all of us. The High Holy Days exist to remind us that we don't need a crisis. We can and should act this way every day. That's why we have commandments. That's why we have mitzvot. That's why they exist. That's why Judaism is a religion based on action, not just faith. Now, it shouldn't take a pandemic to teach us to care about and for each other. But if that's the lesson that we learn from this life-changing event, then let it change our lives and how we live them for the better. What will this year be? How will we emerge? We Jews, we're not really into New Year's resolutions, but perhaps we make an exception in this most exceptional of years. Perhaps we will resolve to emerge kinder or gentler or a better parent. Perhaps we'll focus on becoming a more generous employer or to rededicating ourselves to our faith. History reminds us, and these past 6 months have shown us, that human beings, they are inherently good, and that we have an amazing resolve. In the words of Torah, we are born kedai, we are born worthy. We are born worthy of being extensions of God's holiness in the world. If ever there was a time to set our minds to a task of truly repairing society, of tikkun olam, of truly repairing the world, now is that time. The questions, who shall live and who shall die, are as much spiritual as they are physical. Tonight, we must ask ourselves, how will we live a life that emerges from our current truths? How will we use the emergence of this crisis to remake our community with holiness? How will we take the temporary paradises we have built in crisis and make them lasting experiences of heaven on earth for generations to come? In 1938, at the onset of the final solution, a German Jew approached Rabbi Leo Beck, a leader in the community, and asked him, "Rabbi, how do we get through this?" To which Rabbi Beck answered, "We Jews, we have old eyes." In this new year, I pray that we see this present crisis with old eyes. See past it, see through it, see that we might emerge in a paradise built from a pandemic, better and stronger than before. We have known for years that we cannot continue treating our planet, our social safety net, each other, the way that we have been, and continue to survive, let alone thrive. Put on your old eyes as we enter this new year. Look what this crisis has already enabled us to accomplish between us. We are repairing the world, not as it was, but as it should and needs to be. Gamar Chatima Tova.